His name was Hemu, and he was 42 years old. To anyone who knew him, he looked like an ordinary man living a quietly unusual life. He had been married for years to a woman named Zhang Yong, who was, in his own words, always his most loyal opponent in everything. Outside of his passion for reading novels, Hemu had one other hobby that set him apart from everyone around him. He raised insects. Not casually, not as a passing interest, but with the obsessive dedication of a scientist. He had constructed a large steel enclosure in his home, carefully designed to replicate the conditions of a dense tropical forest, complete with humidity and temperature controls that allowed his insects to live as naturally as possible. He delivered fresh food to them on a weekly schedule and observed their behavior with the same intensity a researcher might bring to a laboratory experiment. One evening, Zhang Yong had not yet gone to sleep. He found her watching his main enclosure from a distance, studying it quietly in the dark. She had been watching it for a week, she told him. He sighed and admitted something he had never said out loud before. He used to be afraid of cold-blooded animals too. She looked at him and asked, half joking, whether there was any animal he was still afraid of. He paused, then told her the truth. Sheep. He was afraid of sheep. She laughed. He smiled. And then, without fully planning to, he began to tell her a story. A story set in the summer of 1997, when he was 7 years old. That summer, his father had taken a few days away from home under the excuse of visiting relatives in a distant county. The explanation had seemed slightly odd to the child, but children accept what they are given. When his father did not return on the expected day, the family waited. When he still had not returned the following week, they began to worry. And when an entire month passed in silence, his mother filed a missing persons report. The police came, took descriptions, noted his father's age, weight, and height, and began their investigation. They found no direct witnesses, no clear motive, no obvious trail. The case went cold, almost immediately. What nobody told Hemu until much later was that his father had disappeared around the same time as a murder case from 1985 had resurfaced in the regional police files. The victim had been killed in a remote mountain county with no witnesses present. The only physical evidence recovered at the time was a single set of fingerprints lifted from the scene. For 12 years, that print had matched no one in any database. Then, a month after his father vanished in 1997, investigators came back to the family home. They took his father's fingerprints from old documents. The comparison results came back as a match. The man who had raised Hemu, who had walked him to school and waited at the entrance every afternoon, was the prime suspect in a 12-year-old murder case. He had disappeared before the police could reach him and had never been found. Hemu was 17 when he finally understood the full shape of what had happened. The dream he had been quietly building of clearing his family name, of finding proof of innocence, or at least of some extraordinary circumstance, collapsed completely. He did not sit the university entrance examination for the subject he had originally planned. Instead, he redirected his ambitions entirely and enrolled in a science and technology program, eventually specializing in bioengineering. He spent years after graduation working at a microbiology research institute, immersing himself in work, filling the days with routine, so there was less room for the questions that never fully went away. In 2009, he met Zhang Yong. They married, settled into a life together, and the days continued their quiet, slightly monotonous rhythm. But in 2011, everything shifted again. Police, working a cold case in a remote valley near his hometown, recovered a set of human skeletal remains. Forensic analysis estimated the individual had died sometime between 1996 and 2001. The age of the bones at the time of death was estimated between 30 and 40 years. The timeline matched his father's disappearance in 1997 almost exactly. The age matched too. The case had moved forward in one critical way since 1997. DNA technology had advanced far enough to be useful. At the time of the original 1985 murder, only fingerprints had been collected. When his father disappeared, DNA analysis was still too limited for practical use. But by 2011, forensic laboratories could extract usable genetic profiles from bones that had been buried for over a decade. The police extracted DNA from the recovered skeletal remains and began the process of cross-referencing it with available samples. Hemu, working in the field of biological science, understood exactly what the test would mean. He sat with that knowledge for some time before the results came back. When they did, the answer was the one he had spent 14 years both fearing and, on some level, needing. The DNA taken from the bones found in the remote valley matched his own profile within the family relationship parameters. The remains belonged to his father. The man who had walked out of their lives in the summer of 1997 had never made it far. He had died somewhere in those hills within the same years he had vanished and had lain there undiscovered while his son grew up, studied biology, raised insects, and married a woman who laughed at stories told in the dark.